Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about character backstories for Dungeons and Dragons. I am going to go over a lot of the mistakes I made when I was learning to write character backstories, including some of the mistakes I still make today. And I'm just going to try and give you guys some pointers from like my own personal experience and other tips that I generally try to give my players when I have them write backstories. Because everyone has their own preferences for backstories. Some people love writing backstories and some people really hate it. So I think this is going to be really important. I'm also going to out myself and it's going to be really cringe. So if you guys like that, let me know. But first off, I wanted to talk about what makes a good backstory. So, something that I usually see when, having a player work on a good backstory and what makes a good backstory is that there's room for growth. It's not, I've gone through 80,000 things already, and like, here is all of this detail. Like, you should leave room so your character can naturally grow and you can improv things. So like it's good to write out like maybe like, oh, your character's favorite food, like have a few fun facts about them. But if you have 100 fun facts about them, one, how the fuck are you gonna remember all of that? I mean, super impressive if you can, kind of crazy. But also it's just a lot and it makes it harder for your character to naturally grow while talking and like having natural conversations throughout the other players in the game. So, that can be kind of difficult. And something along those lines is trying not to make your player backstory too long. This is something I'm guilty of, and honestly, I really struggle with. I have player backstories that are like over 5,000 words long, I believe. Don't do that. Don't do that because your dungeon master is not going to read all of that. Just don't do it. Or something I've learned that I think does help is if you want to write that entire backstory for yourself, go the fuck ahead and write that shit up. But what you should do for your dungeon master is give them a list of about 10 to 15 key narrative points and really important plot points in your backstory, and then give them that as a summary for your backstory instead of just a Word document with like 5,000 words in 10 font because their page cap was like 5. So you made the font really small and then then your dungeon master hates you. Don't do that. Don't do that. And once again, like this is all like stuff I learned as I went because we've all been there. We've all struggled with writing. Sometimes writing is hard, but sometimes you also get really excited to play a character and you're like, oh my goodness, this is all so cool and I want to do all these different things. And also as a DM, don't get me wrong, I am a dungeon master that absolutely loves, and I mean, I love, really in-depth character backstories, but depending on how long the campaign is, if it is really realistically, if it's more than about 3 to 4 pages, it does become a little kind of overbearing because as someone who also likes to include their players' backstories in the story, you don't want to like shove all of one player's stuff in there. And then if you have one player that has 5 pages and another player that has 2 sentences, sometimes it can be a little harder. It's totally doable. Done it plenty of times with a DM, but sometimes just make your DM's life a little bit easier, So I think kind of just going off of the writing too much, I think it's really interesting because for me, when I first started doing D&D, I didn't want to write too much. I was actually really scared to have super in-depth backstories. So what I ended up doing was my backstories used to be really short before I got really into the game. And then as we went, they became longer and longer and longer and longer. And I was like, fuck, I've messed up here. I think I've done this backwards. So in kind of doing that, I, as a DM, now have created steps for my players, they're basically backstory requirements that are very light and they're very easy for players to get into. What I usually have them do is I will require my players to have a backstory. Usually it doesn't have to be longer than 2 sentences, right? If you really don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you want, but I just need 2 names of NPCs that are important to your character and 2 narrative reasons or hooks that your character would be out and about adventuring. And those can be literally anything you want. And then we can work from there and like develop it naturally as the story goes on. Or at least it also gives the people that do like to write more of a space to play because those are very broad and vague requirements. But it's like, it also helps me as a DM because then I can tie in their adventuring hooks as well as NPCs, into the backstory without it hopefully getting too overwhelming. And it also makes it easier for players to create those bonds with other NPCs so the world can, kind of feel more alive. So I think what I'm going to go ahead and do now is for you guys, I'm actually going to read, this is the very first character backstory I really ever wrote. This is for my first D&D character. And sorry. I wrote all of this like just it was on D&D Beyond. I was like, I think I had written it on paper, but I definitely lost that paper. So I'm glad I did end up writing it on this character sheet. I played this character once, I think, like once or twice. And then the campaign died, like they normally do. But this backstory is for a Fire Genasi bard, and I believe it was for a Waterdeep campaign. I didn't know anything about the campaign either as well. So like I didn't know how to build my character into the world with a backstory. So this is what we came up with. So I wrote this in first person, which is interesting. Now I don't normally write backstories in first person as much. I actually usually use third person, which is interesting as well. So pull off the bandit. Okay, here we go. I grew up poor with 2 adopted human parents. They were both adventurers, leaving me alone for long periods of time. They were kind, though, and cared for me. One day, I was about 10, and they took me to see their friend perform. They told me he was a bard and always lifted them up in battle. The next day, they were gone without warning, and then all of a sudden, there was a knock at the door. The bard? He told me his name was Loki, and that I was left in his care. He trained me from that day on. I didn't question it. I'd always wanted to be a fighter, and being able to dance and sing on a stage had always been an impossible dream. My parents had died. Or were on an important secret quest. Loki taught me so much over the years, even how to make my own costumes. I wanted to create a stage persona, one that was perfect and could do anything in the eyes of the people, so that they'd have someone to look up to. I had been training for so long, days turned to weeks, weeks to months, months to years. Just over 10 years, actually. 2 weeks after my first show, Loki passed away, so I set out to defeat the monsters who made people sad and angry to make them happy again. Although everyone and the while running into an awkward social situation where I just didn't know what to do, I'll always try to make everyone smile. Fighting and dancing are just the things I love and allow me to do that. Also, sometimes I'm not very aware, and that can lead to even more awkward social events. That's, So, maybe I take it back. Maybe it was not as good. Don't do this. So, 1, there was only really 1 NPC here. While my parents did just disappear, and the DM can play with that, the reality is they're most likely dead. So I would have thrown another NPC in here. I would also have thrown a better adventuring hook in rather than to just make people smile. While this character may have also been a kicking off point for moi, in a campaign, especially one you know that's going to be running for a while, it's not very effective to just be like, I want to make people smile, so I'm going to go fight monsters. It can definitely work, but I would add also like another reason. Obviously, she wants to follow in her parents' footsteps, so that can be something that you include in there. And then potentially something like, well, maybe Loki didn't just pass away. Maybe he was murdered by something. You know, he's also a bard and an adventurer. So honestly, that kind of checks out. Maybe she witnessed something terrible, like a terrible event. She wasn't able to, you know, like her performance wasn't sufficient enough to distract the creature, or like it can be something along the narrative lines of, I want to make people happy, but like make it something a little bit more substantial and tangible. It doesn't have to be, but that would be my recommendation if you're trying to kind of like get better at writing backstories, and if you're trying to follow those basic rules that I set up. I think the length is pretty good. It's not, I don't think it's too long. I think 1 or 2 more paragraphs in here to maybe flesh out the character a little bit more. And maybe her motivations could have been really good. So if anything, I would make this just a little bit longer. Other than that, I think it's okay. I probably would have incorporated more information about the world if I had it when I was writing this backstory, but I don't believe I did. So yeah, you know, for my first ever backstory, that was, I don't know how long, it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago that I wrote this. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. And I hope these recommendations are helpful. I hope so. So now we are going to read a backstory that I believe this is from 2021. This backstory is 2,877 words. Is it probably really bad? Oh, fuck yeah. Well, hopefully it give you guys some guidance on things maybe you're interested in writing about, or maybe things not to do. Hopefully, will it embarrass me? Oh yeah. So I'm gonna have a sip of my coffee here. Just some coffee before we before I give myself up. I'm so terrified. Because I know that backstory, it was like cringy, but it was also kind of cute. This backstory is a lot. I don't know if I can read some of this on YouTube, so. Because something I also did was I ended up getting, I think, progressively darker and darker as I continued to write. Because something that really interests me in D&D is, you know, potentially like exploring different kinds of trauma and horrific things and like the human experience. So as I get further into my D&D journey, a lot of the times the darker and more horrific my backstories get for characters. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is also what you want to get out of your backstory. Like, what are you trying to explore? Do you have a goal? Like, is there something you want to see from your backstory implemented in the campaign that you can talk to your dungeon master about? So, I guess let's get into this. I hope you guys enjoy this reading. I have not read this, I think, since 2021. This is like, this is the raw Word doc, all right? I'm reading straight from it. I didn't check any of the spellings. I don't know anything. So also, I will preface, this character is a multi-class sorcerer paladin that's dexterity based, that's also half satyr, half elf, but the half satyr, like, but because she's half elf, she had the satyr legs but didn't have any fur on the satyr legs, so it was just like flesh satyr legs. Yeah, I know, my brain is a lovely wonderful place. Okay, let's read. All right. I'm kind of excited. Maybe it'll be better. Honestly, guys, maybe it's better than I thought it was, and then I'll be fine. I'll be like, guys, it doesn't suck. We're going to find out together. A new experience. All right. Born a bastard to her elven mother on the Council of Stars, her mother was ashamed and disgusted, keeping her locked away in an attic in a series of 3 rooms, educating her because what's worse than a bastard is an uneducated bastard. She was taught by her mother's butler, Balquim, a half-elf himself. The only windows were these small slits in each of the rooms, and only led to the leaves and branches outside, too thick to see anything else. One day, when she was about 8 years old, she tried to reach through the window slit, and for the first time felt outside as her fingertip barely scratched the tip of a leaf. Her hand began to glow, shedding a bright light, illuminating the tree around, leaves around hand, creating a beautiful effect. alien to that of Ada Glimmerstone, she very quickly began to realize that this wasn't the only magic she had access to. She could create plants, too, replicating those in the books that Balquim had showed her, until one unfortunate day. She was attempting to see what else she was capable of, and a blast of fire escaped from her hand and impacted directly into the wall, erupting into flames. Both her mother and Balquim came running up, and luckily, her mother, being a part of the Council of Stars, is very familiar in ways of magic, was able to put to the flame out quickly. Ara, while in the process of profusely apologizing, saw the most frightening of looks on her mother's face. For the first time in her life, her mother showed her affection, as she knelt down and placed her hand upon Ara's forehead and said, "It's all right, darling. There won't be a next time," as Ara began to feel incredibly drowsy. The next thing Ara knew, Ara was woke up. What did I do? What is this typing? The next thing knew Ara was woke up in a bed, not her own. As she looked, she saw very small elves sitting, she believed Balquim taught her were called children. They all seemed to be in poor condition and staring directly at her, but that didn't seem to bother her. She sat up on this poorly constructed bed, looking around, and in Elvish spoke with the most confidence and dignity that she knew how, and simply said, "Hello, I'm Ada. It's nice to meet you all." They all then just seemed to go back to what they were doing, which was odd because it was all these strange body movements I had never seen before, and they were grunting and out of breath. Confused, she stood up and headed for the door. As she did, one of the children spoke up. A very lean, dirty blonde girl in rags looked at her with all the fear in the world, and with a quiver in her voice whispered, "Don't. You'll upset them." "Upset who?" Ara asked blatantly. The child gave no response. Ara, obliviously to most things, shrugged her shoulders and continued forward. She took a deep breath and tried the door handle, which was locked, so she then knocked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wham! The door swung open with such force that it knocked Ara back on her bum. Appearing in front of her was a grisly old elf, which is fairly irregular for any type of elf. He wore incredibly light armor and was covered in scars, bearing an eye patch on top of it all. He was quite the gnarly fellow. He basically growled, grabbed Ara by the scruff, and dragged by the scruff of her neck, dragged her out, and slammed the door behind him. He mumbled under his breath, barely audible to Ara, "Whatever the fuck you are, time to test your skill. Stupid little maggots," in Elvish. As she was dragged down this hallway, she simply was mesmerized by the size of this indoor structure until there was a gate up ahead, and looking over her shoulder, Ara could see it beginning to open up. As all of a sudden, she felt her body being flung as she rolled under the gate, hitting the dirt, and when her eyes opened, it was closed. However, she started hearing the loudest noises she's ever heard. These strange chants as she looked around. She was in this small arena, covered in dry dirt, and so many people, it was surreal. The smiles on their faces, it was so beautiful. It was the first time she'd seen other people look excited or happy about anything. She had little time to reveal it as the gate across the way began to raise up, and out stepped a small, gaunt boy with orange cream-colored hair, armed with 2 small daggers, as that same elderly elven man stepped onto a platform above the arena and introduced us as today's little helpless maggots. He screams the word "begin" as Ara watches in horror as this child charges at her in fear and rage, and she just stands there still. She moves out of the way without thinking as he tumbles over, catching himself to charge her again. She puts up her hands, realizing that the same fire as before hitting the boy directly... Wait. She puts up her hand, releasing that same fire as before, hitting the boy directly in the chest. He falls back, crying out in pain as the burns make their way across his torso. The crowd a gasp, but only a mere moment of nothing but painful cry from the boy. The stands erupt in cheers as Ara feels not overwhelmed, but overjoyed as two middle-aged elves drag the boy back. Ara, for the first time, felt warm inside. She wasn't worthless. She had the power to make people this happy, so they'd cheer for her. More, she thought to herself, I want more. I want to see these people smile more. I want to feel warm more. I want this. As she was taken back to the room with the other children, the old elf introduced himself as Jorgen, the Maggot Master, and explained that this place is where bad children are sent who are too bad for their parents to handle, and their only option becomes to fight for your survival. You can only leave if you survive 200 matches and win at least 150. You will now have to follow a strict training regimen. Oh, is this him speaking? Wait. Oh, this is a place where bad children are sent. Those who are too bad for their parents to handle. Now you gotta fight for your survival. You can only leave if you survive 200 matches and win at least 150. You will now have to follow a strict training regimen. As the other maggots they call children. You're fed when you don't complain if you're hungry. And if you try to leave, you'll be killed on sight or when found. You will always be found. Last rule, your last name no longer exists, as you are no longer a part of your family. Ara looked him directly in the eyes with the biggest, widest smile she's ever had and simply said, If winning feels like that, I will always win. Thank you for this opportunity. Jorgen just scoffed. Ugh. Shoved her in the room, slamming the door once more, and walked away. That same blonde girl from before approached Ara and questioned her as to what happened, and as she did that, Ara burst out into a dramatic explanation, livening the other children, instilling just a bit of life into their eyes. They all quickly took a liking to her and showed her how to train, but as Ara wasn't the strongest individual, she felt like she was always lacking behind, as her body couldn't quite bend the way theirs did for a lot of things. But a week passed. Jorgen came back, this time taking two children who were never seen again. This is when it struck Ara that perhaps she should be a bit more serious. Well, she thought about it, and being serious doesn't mean that she can't have fun. She'd never been around people her age, no matter how fucked up the situation was. 4 years had passed at this point, and Ara was now 12. Few children remained from when she had first arrived, but she had made it her job to help everyone feel as happy and loved as possible, but soon Ara may be gone. Even though she grew to love the attention and the kids she had grown to see as her family, she needed to move on to something more. Ara stood at 149 wins and only 10 losses. She walked through the gate a final time, unknown to a certain figure in the audience, and in simple 3 swings of her small daggers, she brought her opponent to their knees and was dragged away. Little did she know that this was a place where freedom was never truly given. As the bidding began, oh my god, this is so cringy. What the fuck? I knew it was like cringe. I don't know that I should put this on the internet. I don't know that Okay. Ara watched in horror. She thought it was the end, that she could be done. A stranger from the very back row stood up, simply said, "She's mine," and everyone else just stopped bidding. Ara dropped to her knees as she was dragged out of the pit for the last time, a gasp by what just happened. She was taken to a room she'd never been to, containing clothes, a changing area, a desk, and some papers, she was given a new set of clothes, and that same man who was shown into the room where he began filing the paperwork. Ara watched in horror as this man stood from the desk. He took Ara's hand and simply said, "We'll be taking our leave." As soon as the door shut behind them, the man asked, "You enjoy this, don't you?" Ara replied by stating it's all she's ever had to enjoy. The man nodded, looked her up and down, and asked, "Have you ever been outside?" Ara only shook her head. The mysterious fellow then warned her of the shock it might cause as he revealed his name to be Elon Shedark. Okay, all right. Ara had spent the past 5 years of her life being trained by the man she thought of as a father, the only adult to ever show her any kindness or courage, a professional in the performance fighting arena. He had been looking for a successor for a while. He taught her how to use her speed as an advantage instead of her raw strength, which she lacked. She was fed 3 meals a day for the first time ever and was allowed to go outside. Basically, be a normal child. She couldn't have been happier until she was finally ready for her first match in front of a crowd. He was a devout worshiper of the god called Brennendal. He knew all about his lore, as many people saw Elon as a joke simply for that reason, no matter his actual skill set. Ara thought this was astounding, a protector who guarded not only one world but multiple. He had a direction and wanted to protect the free will of the people, something that she never had until Elon. She wanted to protect others' free will so they would always be able to smile. As she pondered on this for quite some time, she came to think, what does it matter if people believe someone is dead? It's what they represent that matters. Isn't that why we record history in the first place? Religion had never been a part of Ara's life before, but she never even had that choice. The day of her first public match was here, and she was preparing. She felt a warm presence around her like nothing before. As she was preparing, she felt a confidence surge in her. She knew she was up against someone more experienced and was at a disadvantage, but she's always been at a disadvantage all her life. She only let it excite her even more. This time, the arena was outside, larger than she could even envision, in the sun and with people who perhaps weren't complete arseholes. Perhaps she was called out of the gate, first being the challenger, and it was almost overwhelming. If it weren't for everyone's cheers to calm her, from the other side stepped out the most muscular elf she'd ever seen. Armed to the teeth, the battle had begun. Okay. All right. We're like getting there. This is much longer than I thought it was. Holy fuck. I have so many notes for you guys when we're done reading this. I can't wait. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of things that we're not gonna do in our backstory. He charged first, completely overpowering her with sheer strength, and at the moment, she'd never felt more fear in her life, and she loved it. Ara got a hold of the swing's timing and had a better time dodging at that point, but she still struggled to retaliate, and he kept getting faster and faster until she was already on the ground, almost sure this could be it, as the blade from above was about mid-swing, and it was then where she felt the warm presence again, and she thought, this is my battle, for me, so I can see the stars again, to find my way, my answers, and my strength. And with that, her blade glowed, this bright blue to match her eyes, and she shoved it directly into the sternum of her foe. For this first time, death gazed upon her, while only slightly mortified because it was the cheers erupted in her favor, as death was never required in the arena, but much appreciated by the spectators. That was when she made her name as Ara Shedark. That day, she also realized that power came from Brennendal. It was he who saved her because she put that much faith in someone only because she knew nothing else. But that was proof enough to her that dead or alive, he was watching over those that had faith in him. And for the first time, she stood up in that arena as she raised her fist for victory, but began to cry, for so many things had all finally fell upon her in that single moment. She continued this glorious path, taking over for her adoptive father just as he planned for about 6 years. Not undefeated, but close to it, as those few defeats sparked a rage like none other, because they viewed her weak enough not to kill. For it was a sign of disrespect to leave your opponent alive in a professional match, and growing up it had always been life or death, whether she actually killed or not, until one day, unknown to her, Ara's birth mother was on the watching to finally see who this mysterious new warrior is, and not only but was she disgusted, but in total disbelief that she had given her up to die because she didn't have the balls to kill her herself. What the fuck is this? Ara's mother did her digging, using her political power, and found a rough idea of what happened, and a few days later, Alon had disappeared, and when she woke up one day, there was the only thing left was a note saying, "Dear daughter, you should have never existed." Oh my god! You should have never existed, and what little fame you've built up for yourself will be stripped away once you leave, so you have two options. Stay here and keep your fame, or go to the material plane and search for the only person who really cares for you, which I've locked away because he was a nuisance who put terrible ideas in your head. I'll only tell you that he is with those in the sky, but I promise you not dead. I think we both know what your decision will be, and to that I say good luck and good riddance. Please never come back here, and I will let you alone, and never tell a single soul you are my child. I will make sure you'll be able to access the portal tomorrow at 1 a.m. for 5 minutes only, so don't be late. You should just be grateful that you're not dead yet, daughter. Kind regards, Mother." Okay, we're almost done. Oh my god. Beyond angered by this, Ara Dash was stunned. Her world had been once again ruined by the same woman who had brought her into it. Her choices were taken away from her. This time, though, it would be different. She wouldn't let her mother win. She'd be back one day, not to take revenge, but to try to navigate her on the right path. At least this way, she would be able to protect those who cheered for her from the outside. From a new world to explore, so when the time came, she stepped through the portal. The streets of Chiral were busy, like nothing Ara had ever seen. With so many different looking faces, it was incredible. Everything was new and exciting. She learned how things work here, and was side-eyed many more times than in the Feywild for her looks, which she didn't understand since the people here were already so different. After about a month in the city, she was getting the hang of things, starting to take odd jobs here and there. She then began to make her way through the countryside towards Ziloth. Based on leads, as someone said, Ziloth has to do with the sky access. Ara had finally made it to Ziloth, and to her pleasant surprise, the city was adorned with many decorations that matched those of her chest plate and shield. But before she could ask around, she decided it best to get some shut-eye in the local tavern. Wow. That's the backstory. That's what we're working with, gamers. So, I think that... Look, it's bad. I'm aware it's super bad. But I think here's what we're going to do. There are several things that we can do to fix this, right? I think one of the things that sticks out to me first and foremost is how I kind of left it like I closed it off almost by leaving that note. So, and also with her mother like kind of being in the stands and portrayed as this villain. So I think something to give the DM more room to play next time is if I ever want to, revamp this backstory, what I would do is at the end, I would actually just kind of have the mother's presence be in the arena as some foreshadowing. And then I would just have Elon disappear. And because of that, Ara's now looking for him, right? And that's how and maybe she gets some clue, not directly from her mother, but that he's wound up in the material plane. I also think I would shorten a lot of this out. Honestly, I think we can still leave the fact that, you know, she was trapped by her mother and there was like didn't know she had magic and she accidentally started a fire. I think that's all okay. And then, but it's like shortening and reworking a lot of it. Like you don't need all of this detail, you know, like a lot of it can be built in as you're playing. So I would kind of just make bullet points or just very short paragraphs. And I think you can still keep the gladiator thing, but I think where it stopped making sense to me is why Alon was there. If he was a proponent of this god, right, that is all about freedom, like, and it doesn't make sense, right? So obviously from Ara's perspective, like Alon is this kind of savior, but the reality is he is probably hiding a dark secret, and you don't have to, like, as your character, you don't have to know what that is, but I would just kind of put that in your backstory as like a bullet point, as like, now that she's older and she's reflecting back, like it doesn't make sense why he was at this event for child gladiators involuntarily, but he's this famed heroine and everyone loves him, right? So kind of like give that as your DM as like a preface, right, of like what, you know, now she's kind of suspicious, like really reflecting on this. So what is that? Like obviously there's some sort of disconnection there. Like, does he actually worship this god? Like, is it a lie? And also, like, why does he want Ara? Like, obviously he wants a successor, right? But the more I read this backstory, I think the more difficult it is for me to really pin this with a goody two-shoes, very excitable character, which is what I was kind of role-playing. I think you can still have a very charismatic character, someone who loves the spotlight and loves putting on a show for people. But I think there's a lot of dark undertones that I think should be better adjusted to fit the character, because I think the character was actually a sharp juxtaposition to the background in this backstory, and you can do that, but it's very difficult. And I think when you have themes that are this dark and this heavy, it's much more difficult to do that. And you don't have to make them miserable either, but also don't make them kind of like a know-nothing complete ditz. And that's almost like what I did, right? Because she didn't have experience in the real world. But like, if anything, she has experience in a world that's even realer, right? Like, she's suffered so much in this place that's the material realm knows is beautiful and amazing and phenomenal, being the Feywild, but for her, like, that was a prison and it was horrific and she experienced, you know, nothing good there. So I think it's kind of like actually looking at the reality of the character's personality as well as like the reality of their backstory and just trimming this down. Like, there's so much in here you don't need. A lot of the specifics of like how many wins you need and stuff can be super short. You can include that at like the very end of like, she needed one more win to escape or like to be set free, but there was no, like, you don't need the actual numbers and that kind of stuff. A lot of the character interactions you can have, but I think some of them are unnecessary, especially the maggot guy. I was reading that and I was like, this is a lot, really, just because I was like, I felt like it was unnecessary. I thought the stuff with the children was okay, like, because that demonstrated that she kind of was a leader and was a proponent to these kinds of things, and that was her goal. She really wanted to be able to lead and do these, you know, because that's how she felt comfortable. Because for this character, you know, I think something that I really want to like demonstrate is that she's a very good leader and she's a good performer, but she's not very personable and she's very poor at having one-on-one interactions, which is actually, I mean, that's something I really wanted to explore because that's something that I tend to struggle with a lot as well. Yeah, it's not the worst thing, but it's also really bad. It's bad, and I like the concept. I think I very much enjoy this concept, but I think the way I wrote it was very poor. So after reading this, I would genuinely revisit this character, but I just don't know, like, I would completely rework this backstory. I would keep the same main elements, but I think the ending I would definitely change. I might change some of the characters as well. And if anything, I think it would be interesting, right? Because to have her mom be almost less hateful, still obviously did this horrible thing and less hateful, right? But if anything, you know, that might make her want to go back and kind of chase that route. It leaves more threads open. So yeah, that's kind of, yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed that backstory. This is a backstory I wrote the other day that I have as well. This backstory is really interesting. So I used a prompt. I will link this in the description below in the video, but it's basically encounters with the strange and terrifying 50 spooky plot hooks by the chattering r/D&D behind the screen. A lot of these prompts were amazing. I love doing horror-based characters. I really do. It's probably one of my favorite things. For this backstory, everything that I'm about to read is all bullet points and it's less than a page. I have the prompt on the Word doc, right? And it's 429 words. It's a lot less. And this is also how you would do, in my opinion, this would be a good backstory for someone who is playing an already established character or in a campaign. So say if you're joining a campaign late, or maybe you guys are already like level 5 and you've been in an adventuring party for a while. So if this was for like a 3 or a 4 shot or something like that, like this is, you could also rework this to absolutely be for a level 1 or like level 2 to 3 character. I would just take the stuff about the party that's in here out and just have them do odd jobs on their own to pay for their experiments, which you all will see in a second. And then just have them leave the town or have this be the town where they are coming from and where they meet the party is a new town. So let's go ahead and get into this one, which will be much shorter. So I'm going to read you guys the prompt and then I'm going to read you guys what I came up with based off the prompt. So this is the prompt. One day, somewhere in a city, blood starts living on its own. It started with an animal's blood disappearing after slaughter, but soon it affected humans too. Blood disappeared, seen crawling into the ground. Not much later, even small wounds started to ooze like it was trying to escape. Later, the water began turning to blood. The water in the wells turned to blood. Blood in the rain stained the cobbles on the street end. That was before the blood elementals appeared. So that was the prompt. And what I have isn't the exact same, but I took inspiration from it. And I think finding something like that resonates with you can be super helpful when creating a backstory. The first bullet point. All right, we're going to do the bullet points here. So in a large, fantastical city by the coast, a trade hub for many regions with a vast population, a mad mage, an artificer, if you will, lived in a small building by the water. They adventured for money, and when they weren't doing that, they were working on their own experiments, a desperate ambition in their eyes. They had party members, but mostly kept to themselves to progress their own goals other than when in need for coin. One day, they were working on a re-engineered mechanical body for deceased animals, using a new tome they had found on their adventures. Unfortunately, this seemed to be an unsuccessful endeavor. Except for the unnoticed, singular drop of dry blood left within the corpse. Rejuvenated, it dripped onto the floor, seemingly unnoticed. Disappointed, the artificer went to bed in the wee hours of the morning. There was a rat who skittered outside, its eyes now glowing a sickly red. As the rat scampered into the dark, it was picked off by a hungry cat, and as the cat tore into the rat's flesh, its eyes began to glow a sickly red. As the sun rose and people began to roam the streets, a passerby walked too close to the cat, and as the feline scratched the elven man, me and elves, what the fuck? The elven man, fell to his knees, only but the smallest bit of blood drawn by the cat's claws. His veins pulsated as he convulsed in the alleyway, until he got up as if nothing had struck him. His eyes now a sickly red, the cut on his ankle never healing, only dripping an almost unnoticeable trail of coagulated blood. The artificer woke up late, but they decided to move on from their failure as they had a big adventure planned with the party and didn't want to keep them waiting. So the party left the city in pursuit of coin, glory, and fun, exceptionally unaware of what may await them when they return. So what I would do if you're starting one, I think that's much better. It's simpler, to the point, still leaves there's some mystery, you don't know what's gonna happen, and you have to figure out that, oh shit, maybe I did cause this kind of thing. So I think including, more NPCs, maybe a shopkeep the artificer regularly goes to, just some more people to tie them to the world other than the party. But if this is already like a pre-established character, you know, not as big of a deal. But if it's not, you know, you're starting levels 1 to 3, that's what I would recommend. Obviously, the adventure, this artificer is adventuring to make money for their experiments. So you have this, and then I would also add just what's their like big project that they're working on, what's their main goal they want to accomplish with their experiments, and you know, why is it so ambitious. Honestly, other than that, that's kind of really all I would change, really. I think this is much better than the other two I read to you all, but obviously I've a lot more experience in writing backstories now. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you found this video helpful. I know it was a little bit different than my normal styles of video, but I figured, you know, share some stuff, share that I've made a lot of flops too. And if you guys want me to read more of my cringy D&D backstories, make sure to smash like. If this video gets, I don't know, 15 likes, I'll read another cringy D&D backstory for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Go out there, have some fun, and make some banger backstories. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Bye!